Welcome to Mom Boss Central. I'm your host, Alexia Hoffman. This podcast is where entrepreneurial moms like you and me come together for real and raw conversations filled with practical tips, genuine stories, and a whole lot of girl power. But it's not just about listening, it's about building a community. If you haven't already, make sure to join at mombosscentral.com. So whether you're sipping on a cup of coffee, pouring yourself a glass of wine, or tuning in on the go, get ready to join the conversation and become part of our supportive Mom Boss Central community. All right, Lorraine, welcome to the show. So happy to have you on. Will you introduce yourself and your business and your family for our listeners?
Yeah. So my name is Lorraine Connell. I am the founder of the organization Peers Not Fears, which is a youth leadership coaching program. And I have been doing that for almost 2 years now. Before that, I was an educator for 20 years. And I have my own two teenagers. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old who have taught me more than I can care to admit. But yes, that is me, that is my family. My husband and I are both educators, and we really, really value social and emotional learning for all people, including adults.
Yeah, I love it. That is so great. Well, tell me a little bit more about Peers Not Fears and how you got started doing that.
Yeah, so it goes back to when I was a teacher. As a teacher, I realized that there was this big gap in students who had the opportunity to develop leadership. So, in most organizations and schools included, there are about 10% leadership titles to go around. And so, if we're under the assumption that in order to be a leader, we need a title, then most of us will never have the opportunity to be a leader. But
Mm,
the gap is that we are all leaders. So how are we developing those skills for the 90% of kids who are graduating without those opportunities? And that's the gap. So
mm,
I look at current leaders now, and many of them are struggling in leadership. And it's not because they're not good leaders, it's because there was no opportunity to train as a leader. A lot of times we elevate people into leadership or management and titles because they're good at their job, but that doesn't mean that they're good at managing people. And so I saw these two problems, and I wondered how I could solve that problem. And so solving that problem is what Peers Not Fears does. I can't get to the leaders who are already in titles in the adult world because it takes a lot of courage to admit you don't have the training. And if you've already been given a title, it's even harder to admit
mhm.
you don't know what you're doing or you need
Yeah,
help to do better. And so I didn't want to target that market. And I had spent so many years in education, and I knew there was this gap of 90% of kids who weren't getting these experiences, that I thought
yeah,
that would be where Peers Not Fears would focus. So we focus on school age children and developing opportunities without titles to allow all of those students to practice decision making, problem solving, and inevitably they develop self confidence. And all of those are skills that we want our leaders to have.
I love that. That is so powerful and so interesting. Something that you said is, people with titles feel like they can't ask for help or admit that they are maybe lacking in certain skills that we would hope that they have. And I think that as a mom and a business owner, it's so easy to want to hide from where we need help because we, feel like, okay, we can't let people know that we don't have it all figured out because we're already being questioned so much. Like as a mom and a business owner, oh, are you doing too much? And so it feels like by admitting I need help, that's saying, yep, I'm doing too much, or yep, I can't handle it all. When in reality, it's like we want a platform to develop our skills so we can be better moms, business owners, leaders, whatever it may be. But it feels wrong to ask for that help, or scary because you're worried about the judgment tied to it. So I can imagine that kids can feel a similar way of, I don't want to ask for help because then it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, or that I'm doing something wrong even. So that's so interesting to hear you say that, because I've not thought about it that way from a kid's perspective.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, my story is that I was a mom. I mean, I still am, but mom, teacher, coach, advisor to students. I wasn't a leader. And I was 45 years old when I said, how can not call myself a leader when I'm guiding all of these people in this
Mm,
direction? And what I realize is that often the most important leaders in everybody's lives are their parents, and parents will not say, I'm a leader. And not because they're not admitting they're leaders, is that they don't know. And so if
yeah.
we don't know
Wow.
that we're leaders, how are our kids going to know that they're leaders?
Wow. Yeah, that is so impactful. That's just so important, I think, for moms to hear too, especially with being a, entrepreneur. It's easy to feel like a leader within our business, maybe, but when we go home, we don't necessarily, at least for me, you don't consider it the same skill set, or you don't assert the same authority, right? Because it's a different environment. For me, I feel less qualified in the mom department than the business department, right? Because it
Yes.
feels easier to see my success as a business owner, which is, whether it be monetary or achievement based. It's easy to say, I am doing business well. Here are the results that I've achieved. Where in motherhood, it's not always that black and white. So
No.
I think that is so, so good, and just so important for our moms that are listening to hear. So can you speak a little bit more about what a mom should be kind of thinking about in terms of preaching leadership to their children, so that they feel they have the skill sets needed to be leaders?
Yeah, I think, it goes back to that first thing, right? So, first, accepting your role as a leader and dismissing those myths in momdom that prevent us from seeing ourselves as leaders. And I mean, it
Mhm.
comes up all over the place for business as well. But you
Mhm.
have the belief that leaders have a title, right? We already talked about that. There's not enough
Mhm.
titles to go around.
Yeah.
So if I don't get that title, if I don't step into business ownership, am I not a leader, right? So that
Yeah.
like dismissing of being a leader because I don't have a title, they're not enough, right?
Mhm.
The other myth, and this one is really, really important, especially moms, leaders aren't perfect.
Yeah.
We are not perfect. And I know we hear a lot about perfectionism happening right now, and us realizing, hey, perfectionism, I'm a recovering perfectionism. Well, there's this really strong belief that leaders are perfect. And that's
Mhm.
because we don't often see leaders accepting responsibility for their mistakes because
Yeah.
of that myth. So it's this cycle of like, well, I can't admit I did something wrong because then I'm not going to be perfect. And I know I'm not perfect, but like I have to pretend that I'm perfect. And so
Yeah.
again, that goes back into momdom is like, there is no better way to build a relationship, especially if you have teenagers. Oh my gosh, as teenagers, is when you accept that you made a mistake. The
Mm.
relationship that you have with your kids can change on a dime in
Yeah.
both directions, right? Denying that you made a mistake or admitting you
Yeah.
made a mistake. And unfortunately, when we deny and pretend that we're perfect for our kids, in front of our kids, they internalize that perfection is possible. And
Yeah.
so that was another big one for me. And then the third one is that leadership is something you're born with, and that is not true either.
Mhm.
Leadership is just like parenting. It's a skill
Yeah.
that you develop and you get
Yeah.
better over time. And if you doubt that, think about somebody who plays basketball, right? There are not enough natural basketball athletes. Everybody is working towards getting better. Even the ones who are natural, they
Yeah.
tend to still practice and get better. So
Yeah.
the same thing is true as a mom, as a leader. We have to keep seeing this opportunity to develop the skills.
Yeah.
So if we dismiss those three myths and
Mhm.
we stop and recognize there's only one requirement to being a leader, and that's making a decision,
Mhm.
not whether you make the right or the wrong decision. It's, do you make decisions? And the answer is, we all do.
That's so good.
30,000 of them a day, right? So, like,
Yeah.
I'm already a leader because those myths aren't true and I make decisions. So when
Yeah.
my kid or even my young child is standing there and they're making a decision, they're deciding which direction they're going. That's leadership. That's exactly what leadership is.
Mm,
So it's
wow.
just, how good are you at analyzing and reflecting on whether that decision was right or wrong for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's so good. That's so interesting to think about as well because I feel like it does translate into business also and I mean, into any relationship, not just
Mhm.
mother child, but with our spouse or with our coworkers or colleagues, to think about that repair and how important it is to acknowledge what we've done wrong and to not just brush it off. I know I've spoken about the book Good Inside and by Dr. Becky Kennedy. I don't know if you've heard of it, but she talks
Mm-mm.
about in there how when you acknowledge what you've done, you're teaching your kids to trust themselves and to believe themselves. And I think that's so
Mhm.
important is like to make sure we're really acknowledging, okay, this is what happened. I was wrong. Like that's so validating for them, regardless of how big or little the actual event or
Mhm.
mistake or poor decision was. The fact that we can validate their experience and say, I was wrong and that's okay. It's not just giving them a space to be wrong, but it's also validating that whatever their experience was is true and real, and they can trust themselves and their recollection of what they're experiencing. Because I know as an adult, it's like for me, I've looked back and questioned my experiences in the context of, oh, maybe I was over dramatic or I'm remembering it incorrectly because
Yep.
I'm sure I'm making it out to be worse than it really was, when I don't want my kids to feel that way. I want them to trust what they remember to be accurate and true
Mm.
so they can be confident in the decisions they're making. So I just think that that's so huge and so important to share with our kids and to share in the context of business too. And like you said, even with young kids, like my kids are too little to really understand when I'm making repair. However, it's more for me at this point to get in the habit. So when they're old enough to know, it's not a new skill. It's something I've been practicing is, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. My husband will laugh at me because I'll ask them. I said, "Will you forgive me?" And they don't know. I
Oh,
mean, they say
that's so
yes. It's like,
wonderful.
yeah. So I think that that's so good. What tips do you have for a mom who is struggling to find that connection piece and to really take the time to acknowledge maybe where they need to improve that communication?
I I love Ted Lasso so much, and I'm sure that some of your listeners will relate to this. Is his the scene where he is believed to not be able to achieve something, right? They've made this decision about him, so they're in judgment. And he says to the audience, curiosity. What if you had asked a question? And that is the thing that I hold to be so true in my relationship with my kids is when I have decided about something they've done, something they've said, I'm in judgment. And
Mm.
yeah, I feel like there's a lot of judgment in parenting, but I'm going to gain so much more insight, so much more
Mhm.
understanding, so much more value if I just asked a question, right? So
Mm.
when my child, and I use this example a lot, is my kid oversleeps, right? And so the first thing that I say is, how could you do that? How can you miss this? Is such an important opportunity. Like, why didn't you set your alarm? Why, like sound
Mhm.
like I'm asking a question, but I'm really in judgment.
Mhm.
I don't know. I honestly don't know why that person overslept, right? And I don't
Yeah.
know whether it was a good decision for them or a bad decision. It wasn't a good decision for me because it
Yeah.
impacts my morning routine. But
Yeah.
what if that kid, what if I have two boys, so I'm always like referring to boys. But like,
Mhm.
what if they had stayed up really late that night studying and slept through their alarm, because if they had gone to school, they would have been cranky. They would have snapped at a friend. Like there's so many
Yeah.
things. Every decision we make has a positive value and a negative value. And
Yeah.
only the person who made that decision is the one who can evaluate that. So, like, as soon as I step into judgment, the door shuts. There's
Mm.
no more communication happening.
Yeah.
If I can catch myself, and man, I'm not telling your audience that this is easy. It is hard. But if I can catch myself in that judgment and stop and say, tell me more. Why did
Mhm.
this happen?
Mhm. Yeah.
There's the opportunity to listen and explain and come to some sort of better understanding.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that often, like, I will struggle with, is the consequence that I deliver based in judgment
Mm.
doesn't often fit the crime.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's so true. So true. So interesting too to think about it from a, an honest and unbiased when you like can look back at how often you are actually coming to something in judgment without even realizing it.
Mhm.
Like you
Yeah.
said, our natural response is full of judgment, whether we mean to or not. It's just I think like a lot of that time the natural response has judgment tied to it because of our experiences and our expectations, which for our kids they don't necessarily have that, or maybe there is a good explanation. So that's so interesting for you as you've gone into the business space, and you still have your kids that you're raising. Talk about what that's been like to try to juggle both business and kids and be in such a um, constructive space that impacts how you parent.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question a lot, and I think one of the biggest aha moments for me as a mom who was a teacher was what my expectations were for my students in my classroom. As
Mm.
soon as I started having, or as soon as my children had homework,
Mhm.
I realized how little time students have at home
Mm.
and how little time they have to just be who they wanna be. And so
Yeah.
I taught chemistry, and so in
Wow.
the early years of chemistry, this is 20 years ago, there was this belief that homework taught kids value, it taught them time management, and I'm not gonna disagree that there is some effectiveness to that.
Mhm.
But what was I sending home? Was I sending
Yeah.
home busy work? And if I was, what was my purpose? And I
Yeah.
only realized that when I became a mom and I
Mm.
saw how little time I had with them before they went off to this practice or this
Mhm.
activity. And
Yeah.
and it just really made me reflect on my role as a mom, as a teacher. And so that was a really important discovery for me being a mom. And then I've only been an entrepreneur for 2 years, and it was scary. It was
Yeah.
scary going from something that was constant. I had a paycheck coming in every 2 weeks, and I knew I had benefits, And I just cut that out, and
Yeah.
my spouse was really nervous about it, my kids, I caught myself doing a lot of, "We don't have money for that, we don't have money for that," and that wasn't
Mm,
true. It
yeah.
was, right now, we're trying to keep our resources conservative so that mom can get this business off the ground. And I realized, as a leadership coach for young adults, that I was messaging in a way that wasn't beneficial to my kids. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm doing this really great. I'm doing this really great. And then I realized that I was like sending these messages to my own
Mhm.
children that was
Yeah.
very contrary to the message that I was trying to get out to the teens that I was working with. And so
Yeah.
learning how to balance the fear that is there for me. I'm working through it on my own, but not like putting that like displacing that fear into somebody else's world. And you know, yes, I was showing them that I had courage, that I had confidence. I was doing something that was way outside of my comfort zone, and I know that watching me do that was really beneficial, but there
Mhm.
were some times that I had a negative impact on the family because of my fear, because of this growth. And so
Yeah.
just recognizing, again, we're human, acknowledging that mistake with my own children and saying, hey, when mom was like really not making a whole lot of money, there was a lot of fear and there was a lot of
Yeah.
like talk that came out in fear. And
Yeah.
and like asking them, what would you have said to me? What should I have done? What would you have wanted from me? Gosh,
Mm,
there's so
that's so
much
good.
that we can learn from our kids.
Yeah, that's so good and so important because I think like that, as obvious as it may sound, like that's something that we're so quickly to forget is to ask our kids and like to let them be part of the conversation. Because I know, especially, I mean, I have littles, but it's like it's so easy to forget to give them space to give us feedback and to let them be part of the conversation and the decisions. I mean, in our day to day, because there is so much that I think I just think back to my childhood. Like, I want to be considered. It does impact me, and how powerful that must be for them to feel that they have a voice in those situations, even if it is just how you're communicating with them. Like, how would you have wanted me to do that? I think could be so, so powerful. So, yeah, I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that because I think it's so hard to acknowledge our downfalls a lot of the time, or, where we have weakness or fall short. So, I think that that's, what a great leader does is to share those vulnerable sides too, so that other people can learn from that and maybe take the time to do some self-reflection and say, where am I not showing up in the best version of myself? Even though I am doing a lot of things well, because I know it's very easy to think in black and white terms of, okay, I'm really struggling as a mom in this season, or I feel like I'm doing such a great job right now. But whatever season you're in, to look at the opposite side of that and say, okay, if I'm in a rough season, what am I doing well? Or if I'm in a great season, where can I improve? Not necessarily to have any shame tied to it, but to just be reflective so that you can improve upon that. So I think
Yes.
that's so important and so interesting to think about for you to be preaching leadership and to have teenagers at the same time. That has to be so hard to find the balance. So with on the topic of balance, I mean, can you speak to how you're balancing your time trying to juggle business, kids, all the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I think what was really hard for me when I first transitioned to working for myself was that I felt as though I didn't have a value in the household anymore. I wasn't bringing
Mm,
money in. And I had to redefine what my value was.
mm,
And for a lot of, the beginning part, it was really just I was making my own schedule, yes, but it was a lot of like, I'm putting these meetings in, I'm networking, I'm doing all of this.
yeah.
but I also had the flexibility to be a mom and be the caregiver and be like at first I was very resentful. Okay, now I have to do all the housekeeping. Oh, now I
Mhm.
have to do all the dinner making and all of that. But what I realized was that that became my new value. My value
Mhm.
was being present, being available, being the mom that
Yeah.
I could now be and shifting what my value was. So that was something that helped me find balance, because I was no longer balancing the checkbook with my
Yeah.
paycheck. And things are shifting now. I'm bringing more money in, and maybe I don't have as much time to devote to the family, but I still have that flexibility. And I think one of the things that I have to remember is that my self time is just as valuable as the time I put in my business, the time I
Mhm.
put in for my family, because,
Yes.
you know, if you don't put your mask on first, then you have nothing else to give. And
That is
I am
so good.
so quick to erase my free time on my calendar, but not erase anybody else's free time, and not that, I
Yeah.
guess that's not really what I mean, but like if I
Yeah.
have an appointment that is set for me to just take care of me, I
Yeah.
can push that off, and
Yep.
it's really important to remember that that is just as critical to my schedule as anything else.
Yeah, that's so good. Everything you just said was, I think, so important to for people to hear because I think there is a lot of moms that have maybe been struggling with the adjustment from going from a stable paycheck, a predictable schedule, you're in a comfortable rhythm and taking the plunge into entrepreneurship can be so scary. And like you said, just like so much of your identity and your value can feel tied to that previous profession. So I
Yes.
think that's so important for our moms that are listening to hear and to really think about is okay, how can you shift your mindset on your value? Because you are just as valuable as you've ever been.
Mm.
You have no less value for leaving that job or for pursuing your passions as an entrepreneur. I mean, that's almost more valuable, right? Because now you can show up
Yes.
as a more authentic version of yourself and a more passionate person. And that's also important for your kids to see. So, how can you
Mm.
shift that struggle of feeling like your value was tied to something previous, whether it be a paycheck or a schedule, whatever shifted for you, and look at the new life you're creating and find value in that. I think that that's so, so good. So I'm glad that you shared that.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that was really, really helpful in finding that value was finding opportunities to be grateful, right? And
Yeah.
so when I started my gratitude practice, and people have all different ways of doing it, I would do it before I would fall asleep. I would list the things that I was grateful for that
Hmm.
day. I had to do it about that day because
Yeah.
I had to find something that I could be grateful for in that day. And I didn't know, this kind of came out of it, but I didn't know that there could be silence in my head.
Mm.
And I think it
Yeah.
was my practice of gratitude that allowed for that silence to exist. And I was like, I remember telling my husband, I was like, "Are there times where there's no voice happening in your head?" And he was like, "Yes." And I was like, "I just found that happening."
That is so funny. Oh my gosh. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, as an entrepreneur, it is so hard, I think, to turn it off and to
Mhm.
really like to to stop all the noise and to be present in the moment and like you said to find those positives. And I think it's funny that you said that that's the first time that there's silence in your head is when you're looking for things to be grateful for because sometimes that's how it feels, right? Like there's so much going on, there's so much to do, and then there is so much to be grateful for, but when you stop
Yes.
and you look for it, it can feel sometimes hard to identify
Mhm.
when you have so much going on and you can feel like that chaos and that overwhelm of doing all of the things all day long. So I do think that gratitude is so important. And to find those moments throughout your day that made you smile and how that shifts your perspective. I spoke to someone else who said, just like the principle when you're looking for a yellow car, all of a sudden you start to see more yellow cars, and
Wow.
I think that that's so important because it's like when we know that we're going to be looking for gratitude later, I think it helps us find it throughout the day as well. And it shifts
Absolutely.
the perspective in which we approach certain situations with, as well. So with that, what tips do you have for someone who's adjusting to life as a new entrepreneur?
Networking is amazing. I mean, I hadn't transitioned out of my full-time job when I started networking, but I found a networking group full of women who were just incredibly uplifting. And
Yeah,
it's like you said, it's a very scary leap to take. And to
yeah,
have an army of women behind me just made it that much easier is not really the word that I want to say, but like
hmm,
it just made me feel like I was in community with other people who were doing
yeah,
the same hard thing that I was doing. So
yeah,
networking is one thing, looking for the opportunities to be grateful, looking for your wins, and not to set your win up for being disappointed. Start with something that you're going to accomplish, and then tomorrow lift
yeah.
it just a little bit higher
I
so that
love that.
you can start to build that confidence that we often are lacking as women. So
Yeah,
those are my advice, and just find that community, because
yeah.
being alone in this mess is scary. It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I think that was my whole intention with creating the Mom Boss Central community, was to give a place for people to come and feel no shame, no guilt, and find the people that really understand what it's like to juggle all the things, to wear multiple hats, and to feel like, some days it's great, some days it's chaos, some days it's a little bit of both, right? But we're all going through something similar. And like you said, it doesn't necessarily make it easier, but it does make it less isolating and
Yeah.
maybe more hopeful, right? Like that you're going to get through it and that you can be successful even when it doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel like you're going to make it, whether it be in business or in motherhood, to have those people that really understand what that feels like and can be like a beacon of hope for what the
Mhm.
future can hold when you get through it. So I love that you brought that up because I think community is such a huge piece. And that's kind of been echoed throughout, a lot of my interviews is like, once you let people in and you
Mhm.
share those experiences, you'll be surprised how many people can relate and how many people can share either insight, feedback, or just encouragement. Because at the end of the day, we all want each other to be successful. We want to lift each other up.
Yes.
But sometimes
Yes.
if we're not sharing our struggles, we don't get that ability to let people in and to get the encouragement that would be shared if we are willing to be vulnerable and open. So I think that's so good. Well, Lorraine, I have loved our conversation. I think that everything you're doing is so impactful. I love how vulnerable you've been and everything that you've shared about the transition and just the work that you're doing within your own home and for, students and kids everywhere. So I am so grateful to have you as part of the Mom Boss Central community. For our listeners who want to connect with you, where can they find you and learn more about what your business offers?
My big request is that people join my Facebook group for parents, and it's called Leadership for Our Kids, and it's really geared towards parents, but even grandparents. There's lots of grandparents who are raising kids these days,
Mm,
and anybody working with youth. It's a place for us to be in community again. And
yeah.
yeah, so that would be the best place for people to find me. Peers Not Fears is all of the social links that you can find me. But Leadership for Our Kids, that Facebook group, is where I would love people to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lorraine. We'll link all those links in the show notes below, and I'm sure that you'll have people reaching out to learn more about all the good work you're doing. So thank you so much for your time. Again, we're so happy to have you as part of the Mom Boss Central community, and we look forward to seeing all that you accomplish with Peers Not Fears.
And thank you so much, Alexia.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Mom Boss Central. I hope you found inspiration, encouragement, and maybe even a few new strategies to rock your mom boss journey. Remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. And don't forget to share the love with your fellow mom bosses. Make sure to join the community at mombosscentral.com. It's completely free and a space to connect with like-minded women. All you have to do is sign up and start connecting. Until next time, keep pursuing your passions and living authentically. We're so happy to have you as part of the Mom Boss Central community.